The Brooklyn Nets hold their 2023 Media Day session, and we break down Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Ben Simmons, and all the important takeaways as the Nets prepare for the preseason games ahead.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils and the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free 100% on all those great platforms. And of course, it is the Media Day session for the Brooklyn Nets. It's an opportunity to hear a little bit as we come in live on YouTube, where we always remind you to have the alerts turned on so you get to be a part of these ahead of schedule for the releases on the podcast feed. An opportunity, as I said, though, to hear from some of the key figures. Listen, is it going to be groundbreaking information we get from Media Day? Probably not, but there are a couple of insights when we take a look at Cameron Johnson and his comments. Spencer Dinwiddie has some comments here as well, but then there's the high-level stuff, Mikal Bridges, Ben Simmons, and then even a couple of nuggets around Cam Thomas as well. But one thing I'll mention before we dive in on Mikal Bridges first and foremost, this is the first media day, and maybe fans don't care about this. I still get a little bit of a buzz and a charge when you get to see Mikal Bridges in front of the microphone ahead of the start of the regular season. You get to see Cameron Johnson in front of the microphone ahead of the regular season, right? Those are the two main new figures. A returning Spencer Dinwiddie, who did not lack for entertainment value up at the podium, speaking about his own game and also about Nicholas Claxton, right? Ben Simmons, we have seen him at Media Day for the Brooklyn Nets, but it certainly feels tangibly different this time around than it did in the previous year, because we think, fingers crossed, that he's actually going to be a healthy and big contributor for this team going forward. So it is just nice to have some sense of where this team stands and what they're looking to accomplish going into this season. And at a very high level, I'll just note here, the Brooklyn Nets, by all indications, are going to be a veteran-forward team to start this season. Now, you can say, depending on who you're listening to here, maybe Spencer Dinwiddie being chief among them, where do you expect these guys to go? But when we talk later about Cam Thomas and kind of where his perspective is, we heard from Sean Marks and Jacques Vaughn earlier in the week in their own press conference that we can apply to some of the comments we got here as well. It really does feel like coming into this year, it's going to be about, obviously, Mikal Bridges, about Ben Simmons, Cameron Johnson, Nicholas Claxton. Those are the core guys, Spencer Dinwiddie included with them as well. But then even Dorian Finney-Smith to that extent, even Royce O'Neal. So with all the young players that we're certainly excited to see with the Brooklyn Nets, it still feels like this is a team that has set an expectation and a goal this year. It's a different version, but one that wants to still accomplish things like getting back to the playoffs once again. That being the case, Mikal Bridges gets up in front of the podium, and there's a couple of nice things, sentiments that he provided here. Listen, we could go back and talk about the questions where he was asked about FIBA and his takeaways from there. We know it was great for him to play with those high-level talents. It was great that he was among the most talked-about players coming out of FIBA, and yes, they came up short not achieving their goal. That's fine. But he feels good coming off of that and now getting into training camp. One of the high-level things that we love about Mikal is obviously that Iron Man mentality that he brings to the court. And between not only the Media Day session, but also over on the Yes Network when he spoke with Frank Iasola, you also heard him reflect on the fact that, listen, you're never playing 100%. We saw this last year, tweaked an ankle maybe here or there, went out of the game for a few minutes, but always came back in, always finished. So when you think about a player, and we say, oh, he's always healthy. Maybe he's not always healthy. And there's different degrees, as Mikal mentioned, different degrees of injuries. But the bottom line is, if you're good enough to be out there on the court, in his mind, he's going to be out there on the court, right? So you love that he's bringing that mentality to it, and that coming into this season, the expectations are elevated around him being a leader. He is the leader of this franchise now. He's the leader of this starting unit, and he doesn't seem to be particularly fazed by that next level of elevation. It certainly comes with, from his mind, just the natural progression of where he wants his game to go. You start out as being a role player You're dialed in on your defensive aspects of your game. And then over time, you go become from this off-ball slashing wing to a player that you and perimeter shooter to a guy that now feels like he has a real opportunity to take that next big step forward. Tongue in cheek, by the way, when asked about wanting to be an all-star this year, some of those accolades that he can get, that's awesome. But he also, I think the comical note that he had was his agents are probably a little more excited about that because there's some money that's attached to those type of career accomplishments, and that spreads around the wealth a little bit. But he's mostly honed in on his own game. And everybody brought this up when they were discussing guys that came over, especially last year. But Mikal said, when you talk about coming over last season from Phoenix and then also having Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie come over for Dallas and then having the existing core of players, maybe chief among them, Nicholas Claxton. There's a difference in trying to merge three different systems effectively together, right? Cameron Johnson mentioned this going back to last year, even over those last 27 games, saying terminology, yes, but also mentality, right? Defensively, what does Jacques Vaughn want us to be doing? And am I getting caught mentally processing that as opposed to just read and react? So Mikal called himself out on a couple of different areas, obviously on ball, but he said some back cuts that he was getting beat on. Well, that's not his primary defensive assignment, but also just that awareness that he wants to have. So he feels like he knows. And we talked about this on the podcast going into this past offseason here about how, hey, listen, you go look at the net ratings. Cameron Johnson and Mikal Bridges did not play at the same level defensively as they had in previous iterations. And we, I think, can still look at it and say, is that about not playing behind other superstar talents? From Mikal's position, it's just about getting dialed in. And it's having a training camp, it's having preseason games to really gel with these guys. And the other aspect of it that he just threw in here as we roll through some of those big takeaways, we'll say, high-level takeaways. Scoring with the ball, obviously. Facilitating, yes. But he also said locking in on defense again, making that a key component of his game, and then the rebounding. And that's really a through thread here. You go back to the press conference with Jacques Vaughn and with Sean Marks, whether you love the answers or not, they both said, when talking about the rebounding and what that's going to take for this team, they said, yes, scheme's going to matter here. The roster is going to matter. We had a limited time to prepare when it comes to correcting some of those issues. They don't in any way make any bones about the fact that they didn't just go out and get one singular guy to solve that problem. But you do look back in on a Mikal Bridges, on a Cameron Johnson, on the guards and say, yeah, it is going to be a gang rebound mentality for this entire roster. And as a footnote to what Jacques Vaughn said about that, it's who's going to have those opportunities, right? Day'Ron Sharpe's still here. You bring in some other players, the Trendon Watfords of the world, and you want to see if they can give themselves an opportunity. A footnote in regard to this overall, we're going to talk about the high-level guys. We may get a chance here, Doug and I, as the week progresses, to touch on the younger group, the new players, the flyer guys, as we refer to them this year, and just what are the takeaways that we got from them at Media Day as well, many of them sharing sessions with another player. Cam Thomas was up there with Trendon Watford with their LSU connection. You had Day'Ron Sharpe sharing the stage with Darius Baisley. So, again, as you tier out through the players, you're going to go ahead and get a tiered expectation of responses, how much they're going to communicate and convey to you relative to just getting to camp and trying to work their butt off. So would you expect anything less than Mikal Bridges saying he's feeling good, he's excited for the opportunity, and he believes this team can take that next step forward collectively as they have the chance to gel? That's something that I've hung my hat on when we look at the win total and 37.5 as the over-under. I think, yes, an off-season, the addition of Ben Simmons, who we'll discuss here in a second, and just having a chance to really lock in on what Jacques Vaughn wants individually and collectively from this team seems to be something that Mikal Bridges spoke to. Coming up here in a second, we will talk Ben Simmons, and we also have some Cameron Johnson and Spencer Dinwiddie notes that I think does inform in big ways the expectations for their roles as well. And we'll dive into that coming up here in just 1 second live on YouTube. But first, we're going to tell you about our friends over at Ibotta. Why? Because it's football season, so that means pizza, wings, and maybe even some buffalo chicken dip. Oh, baby. But whatever you prefer at your tailgate, you want to go all out and get cash back on every single purchase with Ibotta. Whether it's going to get that cooler that you want to fill up with all your great beverages, it means you want to stock up the closet with your winter clothes as it rolls around. Ibotta, when you use it, is going to get you cash back on winter coats, on hats, on gloves, on scarves, and so much more that you're getting for you or your entire family. You're already making these purchases, so why not get cash back for it as well? And the holidays are not far off, which means you might be going along with a long list of gifts for those significant others, maybe extended family. People always have expectations here. Don't just spend money on everybody else without getting anything in return. Use a Ibotta, and start getting cash back today. You download the Ibotta app now and use code LOCKED to start earning real cash back. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKED. Start getting back cash now, as on average, Ibotta users earn $100 per year. Okay, so as we move the conversation over to Ben Simmons, this is a lot of affirmation around things that we've heard from his media tour over the course of this offseason. He's back on the court. He's playing 5-on-5. He's healthy. He's ready to go. Yes, we've heard these things before from him, but the timeline with the injury and everything else seems to line up. You can go back last week as well and hear Doug Norrie and I when we talked about that relationship with Jacque Vaughn and the acknowledgments on both sides that they didn't really know each other that well, and they didn't really understand Jacque Vaughn, where Ben Simmons was physically, and Ben Simmons didn't really know who Jacque Vaughn was as a coach. That was alarming, isolated to itself. But the Nets had a season that they needed to address, and Jacque Vaughn had to stay focused on that. And arguably, Ben Simmons, at the end of it, was probably spending the majority of his time even being occasionally around the team, trying to focus on getting healthier. So it seems like they've gotten themselves back on the same page in that regard. Feels really good, Ben Simmons does, to be able to get out there and continue playing. Yes, when asked, he confirmed, I want to be the point guard, leading by example, and be a leader of this team. So we think about that hierarchy. Yes, Mikal Bridges is the face of it, but nobody has more high-level experience than Ben Simmons on this roster, right? He has had some of those career accolades that Ben Simmons is, Mikal Bridges looking to check this year. So you'd hope that the team and those other experienced players can lean on him for that as well. One worthwhile note, too, is he has consistently, Ben Simmons says, I want to be the point guard of this team, right? I want to be facilitating. That is who I am at my core. But he also acknowledged that now there's going to be other aspects to it, right? And again, tie it back to Mikal Bridges, tie it back to the mentality of Jacque Vaughn and what he wants his system and scheme to be predicated on. Ben Simmons, make no mistake about it, when you're that big body and when this team does not have a lot of size, the expectation is, especially on the defensive end, you're going to be helping that rebounding process, whether that's you physically getting those rebounds or boxing out some of those bodies so that the Mikal Bridges, Spencer Dinwiddies, Cameron Johnsons, right, whoever's going to be on the court there can go get some easy rebounds and start to get this ball in transition. Ideally, as he said when talking about the defensive potential and working with Nicholas Claxton, first and foremost, I did find this interesting. First and foremost, that he's excited to work with him, obviously, and the defensive potential with multiple guys that can play 1 through 5. He described it as scary. We've heard that term used before with the Brooklyn Nets with superstars, so maybe we'll find a different term for it. But he feels like that can really help lead. That versatility defensively can help lead to the transition game and help lead to some easier opportunities on the offensive end. Now, that being the case, if there was one takeaway that I'd have from it, he said when asking about, question on Nicholas Claxton, just from a NBA standpoint, historically, players like them, and we're going to talk about Claxton as well, players like this don't often blend their games well together. Hard for them to be on the court together. Well, Ben Simmons' response was, somewhat a bit of dismissive of says who. But he said, give us 30, 40 games on that fit and play alongside of Nicholas Claxton. If there is a world outside of just Ben Simmons individually, the matchup and working cohesively with Nicholas Claxton, when you hear that, it at least for me said, okay, whether it's Ben Simmons or the team as a whole, there is going to be a learning process with those two specific players. The guys playing off of them, well, you already got at least a little bit of work there with Nicholas Claxton, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Spencer Dinwiddie, who had experience with him before the trade to Dallas or to Washington and then to Dallas, et cetera, et cetera. So you have these guys that have had some, opportunity to play together, and Nicholas Claxton and Ben have as well, but not in these roles, right? Not where Nicholas Claxton is now ascending into a potential defensive player of the year candidate, not where Ben Simmons is going to need to be an on-ball facilitator and orchestrator of this offense in a different way than when you have Kevin Durant, I forgot his name. Who even knows these guys once they leave the team? Or Kyrie Irving, the ISO game, right? That stuff can take over for big stretches. And Ben Simmons can at times be relegated to, hey, you need to be able to go down and get those rebounds. You need to be able to attack at the basket. And as we said, if we said it once, we said it 1,000 times, his health prevented him maybe from being able to do that at the highest possible level. So those are the takeaways that I have from Simmons, most notably working with Nicholas Claxton, going to need some time there. If we turn our attention over to then Nicholas Claxton, before we revert back to Cameron Johnson and Spencer Dinwiddie, want to isolate those guys as it addresses the perimeter shooting game and even some on-ball stuff as well. It ties back into Jacques Vaughn's comments going back to his press conference as well. Nicholas Claxton, on the personal and team goals, you can already tell, and he said it, after Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving went away, him being regarded as Defensive Player of the Year went out the window. He was no longer a part of the NBA media thought process. And maybe rightfully so. The team obviously started to fall off there at that point. There wasn't an expectation the team was going to go on a run. But he also pointed out, anchoring the defense in drop covers, working on the switches, he has come in with a mentality that he is as much, and he should be. He's one of the top 4 players on the team at worst, that he needs to be, and that he already has cemented himself as a top defensive player that needs to be treated as such. He's speaking with confidence. He's speaking like a guy who is not concerned about stepping out of the court game 1 or game 82 and saying, whatever the challenge is, whatever the task is, I've already proven it. Now I'm just going to continue to do it and build off of that as well. He did speak on, obviously, the rebounding aspect of the game, not just for himself. Touched on the idea, and Doug and I have mentioned this when we think about Nicholas Claxton. You go back and look, remember, it's been incremental growth for him in terms of games played, in terms of getting a little bit bigger. He did mention playing with my size and playing healthy. Got a little bit bigger. Now it's about being healthy. He wants to be out there and available for all 82 games with that same workload expectancy. So he still is, even at just 24 years old, going to be entering into another phase of his career. Did it last year for the first time in a big way, but now it's going to be that you're out on the court for 34 minutes, right there with all the other starters, and you're going to be expected to be able to play clean basketball defensively, switching defensive basketball, and then also continue to evolve your offensive game a little bit. And if I want to take something away from Nicholas Claxton when we talk about the offensive side of the game, I did note here, 3-point shooting. He said, I used to shoot, and paraphrasing here, I used to shoot the 3. I worked on it a lot this offseason. Now he's not going into the season saying, I need to shoot 3s. That needs to be something that I do. But he did say, if it's there, I'm going to take it, because if it's the natural progression of the offensive set, if those opportunities come, he's not going to be shy about pulling the trigger. Does this mean that we need to start setting the over-under on Nicholas Claxton and, I don't know, over 100 3-point attempts, over 1 a game this year for Nicholas Claxton? Probably not. But I think that it does matter. When you have Ben Simmons on the court and you're going to be playing with him, there is going to be those times when, if Ben Simmons is on that ball and he's driving the paint, are you playing just off and sagging so the drop-off pass is available and the easy flush is on the table? Of course. But there's just going to be worlds where in transition that you may have been the one who comes down with the rebound, outlet passes to Ben Simmons, and finds yourself trailing the play. At some point, you're just going to need to take 1 or 2 of these things just to see if you can knock down the occasional triple, if you can kind of get the defense going. Again, I think it's highly unlikely that becomes a massive part of Nicholas Claxton's game, but he went out of his way to mention it, and that's really just the reason why we bring it up here. Other part 2, just when we talk about his expectations from a team standpoint, he said being that gritty team, being that scrappy team, self-acknowledgement from head coach all the way down through this roster. We are not going to be the most talented team on the court every single night. Rebounding is going to be a part of it, and he regards himself as an emotional and vocal leader ready to take that next step when it comes to being that voice inside of the locker room, and that's just who he is as a player and as a personality. I'll be very fascinated to see what he and Ben Simmons can look like on the court together when we're talking about guys that can play with aggression. Nicholas Claxton, though he may not be the biggest built out in frame player, we know, we've watched him be just demonstrative, not only on the offensive end when he gets those big jam opportunities and likes to put some of that grimace on the face. We've seen it defensively as well. He wants to wear that badge, and I'm really fascinated to see where that next step of his game comes here, and we'll find out. Another player on this roster in a second, Spencer Dinwiddie, that believes not only, I don't know, we'd have to check the timeline. I think I and Doug Norrie may have been on the front foot of what Nicholas Claxton could be, but Spencer Dinwiddie feels like the media slated him in his measurements of not only Nicholas Claxton, but maybe himself. So we'll dive into Cameron Johnson and how the evolution of his game is going to look, the injury update, Spencer Dinwiddie, and yes, even get that note in there about one Cam Thomas and where expectations should be set. All right, so as we round out our media day coverage for the Brooklyn Nets, they have next Monday this upcoming Monday is going to be the first preseason game, and we'll obviously be breaking down what we see as these guys get out there on the court. Reminder for everybody, the one thing that you can do is go over and not get onto, go over and get over to subtext.com/lockedonnets, where you can be in on the conversation when the podcast ends, when the YouTube post-game sessions end, and you want to keep talking with Doug Norrie and myself. You get over there. It's just like being in a group text message with you and all of your buddies. Free 14-day trial, effectively the cost of a cup of coffee over the course of a month. And that means that we can keep talking about game day previews, key matchups that we want to discuss. And then as we get into the year and we're hearing the buzz from the G League or where some young players are, or you just want to vent your frustrations about Cam Thomas's role, get after us. Go over to joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets today. Okay. So the other obviously big name here in the Brooklyn Nets organization is one Cameron Johnson, fresh off of a big payday for himself. So the first thing is obviously, how's your health? Because we heard unreported hamstring, little tweak last week. Didn't seem to be a big deal. Addressed it right out there. Yeah, I'm good. He expects to play at some point this preseason, maybe not on Monday, but expects to be out there. Not concerned about it. Not a big deal. So we take it at face value and say, okay, he's ready to be healthy and coming in the door. And just to follow up on that, addressed it, rehabbing it. Not a big deal. He had an awesome experience, obviously, in FIBA as well. Was grateful to be able to play with those guys. That's good. We also know that his role greatly reduced over the course of that FIBA run. Now, when we talk about Cameron Johnson, we've said this, or Doug and I have said this, the contract tells you that expectations are elevated for him coming into this first full season with the Brooklyn Nets alongside Mikal Bridges. And he said the next step for him is the all-around step. And he said that that's basically been the progression of his career. Each and every offseason, he tries to add a little bit something extra, tries to address another area, and continue to build on that. Now, he said on or off ball, the scoring repertoire and contributing more on the glass. Again, every single one of these players from Mikal Bridges right on down said, I need to be. So you can already tell the message from Jock Vaughn is this is going to be the team mentality. Nets fans are not going to love it, but it's going to be about that gang really rebounding mentality and being dedicated to showing it on that end of the floor. When Ben Simmons, when Nicholas Claxton, when Day'Ron Sharpe, when he comes in, when Dorian Finney-Smith, one of the bigger bodies for whatever it's worth, when those guys are in there and they're providing some box out coverage around the basket, it's going to be up to these other players to step up, get those rebounds, and start to ignite that transition game. The on-ball part of it, I think, was interesting, though, for me, because we said that full repertoire. I really do, and Doug and I have talked about this. People think that when we discussed usage rate for him, it's going to go up. It's going to flip with Spencer Dinwiddie in this upcoming season. And there seemed to be a little bit of sentiment of pushback around that. But again, you're getting paid the big money. And when you're out there on the floor with Ben Simmons and hopefully some of those collapsing defense opportunities, those matchups are going to be there. And Cameron Johnson said, not just, when it gets kicked out of the wing, can I take a guy off the dribble and maybe drive the paint? Something we saw him do more and talked about those percentages from Phoenix to Brooklyn. Yes, he put the ball on the deck and got at the basket with a higher frequency coming over to Brooklyn than he had in his time in Phoenix. But I really do think there are going to be instances when he has the ball in his hand and he's going to have the opportunity to help dictate a little bit of the offensive tempo. Remember, they picked up a player like Dennis Smith Jr. as well. But from the starting unit to the second unit, making sure you have some ball handlers. Is he going to take this exponential leap? No, he's 27, 28 years old, right? The game does not just all of a sudden come out of its shell in a way we've never seen before. But the Nets are going to need ball handlers. And Cameron Johnson needs to, in every phase of his game, take the next step. And it looks like he's done that. And we're happy about that. There's not, other than that, I think it's just about seeing him go out there, playing some injury-free basketball, being a key contributor, and all we can do really with him, I think. And you can mention the three-point shooting. We can mention the defensive rating as well, just like with Mikal. Got to lock into that. And he referenced the same thing. Terminology, verbiage, expectation, right? Coaching staff. This was mentioned by, I think, Mikal first and foremost. Jacque Vaughn has his coaching staff in here now coming into the season. They are a lot of developmental guys. So you expect that the system, the scheme, and the way that these players communicate with one another should be that much stronger after having some experience with certain players last year and now rolling it over, getting into training camp, getting some preseason games under your belt as well. We bring up Spencer Dinwiddie here for a minute before we close out with a note around Cam Thomas. Spencer Dinwiddie we bring up just because I think he's just an absolute pleasure. He gets in front of the microphone and he's ready to have a good time. He's ready to talk about anything and everything. And he already said, mark it down. Nicholas Claxton is the best defender in the league, and he got snubbed for Defensive Player of the Year last year. He wanted the media to write it down, wanted him to book it, and then go ahead and bring it back up down the road. So he is full hype mode when it comes to Nicholas Claxton. The other area that he pushed back on is around this idea of the three-point shooting percentage. Now, as we've said, the catch and shoot three, he's really good at that. And we think, as Jacque Vaughn also talked about at his press conference, more opportunities with Ben Simmons for some more catch and shoot three looks. And one tie in here to Cameron Johnson as well. Jacque Vaughn had said this going back to their press conference joint with Sean Marks. So he had said, and I want to make sure that I hit this, Cam Johnson, 8 to 10 3-pointers a game. Yes. When it came to Spencer Dinwiddie, he said, yeah, 6 or 7, 100%. The blend between more catch and shoot opportunities for him where he shoots a much higher percentage, and then said Spencer Dinwiddie also needs to get better on the off the bounce 3-point shots as well, taking his man off of there. When Spencer Dinwiddie got in front of the microphone, he categorize that as when you look at what was the 28% coming over from Phoenix and some of those moments. He said, well, when you talk about late shot clock, buzzer beater, play breaking down, nobody shoots well from beyond the arc or as well as they normally do. And that is true. And also, Spencer Dinwiddie cannot afford to be a 30 to 33, 34% three-point shooter this season. He really can't afford, if they're going to be, as Jacque Vaughn suggests, a combination of the catch and shoot and also off the dribble, he can't afford to be, well, in these moments, I'm going to knock him down for you. But in these moments, it's going to be a problem. Because when we identify this role, Jacque Vaughn still said, Spencer Dinwiddie is going to be a guy that is going to, when we talk about the second unit, yes, he's going to do some pure point guard. He's also going to do some off-guard work for us with the emergence back of Ben Simmons healthy there. Dennis Smith Jr. now being part of this. So Spencer Dinwiddie is going to be asked to wear a lot of different hats inside of this offense, depending on what the situation calls for. Listen, I know that we talk about Spencer Dinwiddie honestly, but I also do feel like that we as a fan of the team, you watch the bad shooting percentage, you go, oh, come on. And I said this from the second we got into the offseason here. Spencer Dinwiddie's role is going to look different this year. His usage is going to look different this year. And that's a good thing. Because I think as he gets into his 30th year of life and his, I don't know what year, about probably a little over, he came in late bloomer. So, I mean, he's only been really playing at a high level, playing in a starting role for 6 years now, maybe. But he needs to continue to evolve his game and understand what his role needs to be. He's never going to lack for confidence. And the one other note here that I said at the top about who's going to be leading this team, he said, yeah, we're young in depth, paraphrasing, but the starters, the key players, 27 to 30 years old. Again, inferring here whether or not that's him at 30 years old saying, I'm going to be a key part of this, but it does seem to be coming from the top down. The first foot out the door here in this season is going to be led by the experienced players and seeing how the young guys can develop in behind them. And that's where we come to our last note. And that's going to be Cam Thomas. He was up there with Trendon Watford, LSU teammates, going back a handful of years. And listen, last week we talked about it. What do we want the starting lineup to be? Who should be there? I say, let this kid play. Get Cam Thomas into the lineup. You can go back and listen to Jacque Vaughn's comments about Cam Thomas coming this year and expectations. And you can even listen to Thomas. What did the team tell you to work on this offseason? I ain't been told nothing. And by the way, he still said that getting stronger, right? Getting more physical, just being ready to play, locking on the details like any other player would. But it again represents a slight departure from the rest of the mentality and the sentiment from players, from Jacque Vaughn down, saying, oh, knowing what the coach wants to do, knowing where we need to be positionally. He mentioned just being ready, right, when he gets called on, reflected on last year, right? Some big opportunities, some nice highs when you had 40-point games, and then also having to sit and wait. All of these things, at least in the short term, and it's not just from his media day, it's the collective communication we're seeing here, tells me, and he even mentioned too, again, to paraphrase, I don't have an answer on that when asked about what his role is going to be. Always going to be ready to play, maybe playing more of a point guard role, maybe more scoring, getting the buckets, whatever the role is, he's going to be ready to do. So I'm not knocking any of his responses in any way, but it does seem like confirmation that while they're talking about his role growing, it's not going to be an instant. It's going to be, as Jacques Vaughn put it, earned, not just for Cam Thomas, for everybody. It's going to be earned. So on the onset here, Cam Thomas, I think, remains on the outside looking in terms of a large role with this team. And I don't know. Right now, I'd probably say that my mind tells me he's going to have to prove that he deserves the six-man role coming off the bench. Not telling you that's what I think it should be. Not telling you that Doug Norrie and I haven't talked about this at length this offseason. But as we said, when they brought in Dennis Smith Jr., when they brought in Lonnie Walker, these are not one-to-ones when it comes to Cam Thomas, but they brought in players that can occupy minutes on this roster and can stand between Cam Thomas and significant minutes if he doesn't show a dedication to the little things. Defensively is obviously a big part of that as well, as has been often mentioned and addressed by Jacques Vaughn. So still the same kind of mentality when it comes to Cam Thomas. We hope that it continues to show. And obviously, as we get into next week, the preseason games will tell that tale. And maybe he showcases it. And if you're watching for it, don't watch for the offensive game where we know he's capable. Watch for whether or not he's out there and showing effective defensive awareness, situational awareness, basketball IQ on the defensive end, because that clearly is the way he's going to get rewarded with more opportunities to be in the game and show us what he's capable of on the offensive end. We heard a little bit from Day'Ron Sharpe here, who got the vote of confidence from Jacques Vaughn as well to have an opportunity. Darius Baisley, I'm only going to footnote this, and we'll go deeper on Dennis Smith Jr. and everybody else, but I want to hit all the high-level guys here first and foremost. It was asked about goals for this season. Darius Baisley was up there with Day'Ron Sharpe. He took, it was a mildly long pause to win, and then waited for the next question to come up. I like that too. I like the mentality. What am I here to do? To win basketball games. That's what we want for the Brooklyn Nets, and that is tying a bow, at least for now, on our takeaways from the media day session. You know that throughout this week, we're going to be talking about, again, some of the other younger players, the flyer guys that were brought in, but Dennis Smith Jr. as well. Doug and I will come back in and continue to talk about these takeaways from media day. Think about where we want to plug these guys in, and then start to set the expectations around what do we want to see out of the first preseason game next week. So we'll tie a bow on these things so that going into those set of games, only 3 of them on the docket before the regular season will kick off, it's going to be a finite window to learn some real concrete information around where guys are in the pecking order and where we think this team, veteran or youth, is going to start this season from a mentality standpoint. The other thing you get to do is go over to YouTube, subscribe, turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live on these sessions. You can even watch me drink some water, as I almost had a cough fit happen right there at the end of the episode. And then you get the podcast wherever you get those needs fulfilled. It's 100% free. That's what Doug would tell you. It's 100% free, but it means the world to us. You can also follow at Doug Norrie, at Adam Armbrecht, and at Locked On Nets over on Twitter/X. So you can get all the updates as we're covering the team throughout the season ahead. And as you all very well know, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote, short of saying that I miss my friend, and I can't wait till he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball, media day, basketball, yeah. All right, as is the case, I'm going to stick around just for a few minutes because I can't pull myself away when we do these live sessions and I see you guys come in and I can see the chat is filling up, especially when we're doing a solo one, a little harder to monitor them. I always want to make sure that I take a moment to shout everybody out that took the time to come be a part of this. So for a few minutes here, we'll stick around. We see some frequent flyers. We shout out the Libert. Why? Because he was first and he let us know there, and also got some accolades from everybody else. Gerard also in on the conversation here as well. Christopher, thanks for coming in here. D-Rock. You should, though, maybe think about getting your PhD. Very good to see everybody in here as well. If you have anything and you were up there early and often, feel free to go ahead and reiterate your question at the bottom here, just so I can see them. Otherwise, we'll just give you, again, a little bit of a pat on the back for being a part of it, and we'll get out the door here. I do see from Glairon. Cam Thomas is the best fourth quarter scorer on the Nets. He is the best player on creating fouls. He is the best late game closer. Yeah, I mean, listen, especially from the creating foul standpoint, it's one of the things that we loved about his game, right? Gets to the free throw line. I mean, he has the ability to take guys off the dribble, penetrate into the lane, draw on the defenses, and shows really a nice job even in his rookie year, absorbing contact, finishing those plays, and getting some and one opportunities. So, yeah, listen, do I think that all those things are inside of his game? Yes. Do I want to say that maybe if we want to rein ourselves in a little bit, saying that he is the best in all of these things, you need to see it at a consistent level. And I'm not saying the Nets haven't stood in the way of that, but you need to see it over 20 games when he's playing every single night, right? The grind of the NBA season before we anoint him with something that the Nets just haven't allowed us to have a big enough sample size. But again, the foul creation, 100%. I think there hasn't been a quarter when he's played that he hasn't been able to show production. But as we've said, there have been a couple of instances where we've seen him go through cold spells, as is the case with any player. And when that happens, that's when you want to see the dedication to impacting the game in other ways. That's where having a little bit of point guard to you needs to start to come through here. That's where being dedicated defensively needs to come through here. And that's the difference. You don't have to knock Cam Thomas that, well, if he's going to be streaky sometimes offensively, you can't have him on the court for the scoring reason. Well, that's first and foremost. But Jacque Vaughn and the Nets will give him more opportunities if he's showing the dedication at both ends of the floor. What else we got here? I think this is Cam. Play well without being a complete ball hog and involve his teammates. Yeah, that's Cam. Exactly. And then that's a part of it. Listen, and we've said he needs to have a role, but we'll see how the organization thinks about it in that regard. Who was getting cooked by? Yeah, Mark mentions this one here. Who was Cam getting cooked by that everyone was so critical of his defense? Or are you all just going with the narrative? Again, no, it's not going with the narrative. If you go back and watch, this is about in the same way that if Seth Curry was on the floor, if Joe Harris was on the floor, automatically you're calling out those switches and you're looking to attack that player. And it's not even just about on-ball defense. I actually thought that he did show some growth in that area last year, keeping himself between the player and the basket. But it's about what's happening away from the ball. It's about being aware of what you need to be doing on the weak side basket around if you're going to be working rotations, if you're going to be working switches, and making sure that you're getting yourself in the right spot. This isn't an overwhelming knock on him. We know that the offensive game is there. It's just saying this is what the team is telling you they need to see more of. And yes, he is going to be the weakest defensive player on the court no matter what when he's out there because of everyone else the Nets have brought in. Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, these guys are always going to be better and more capable of doing those things, right? Dennis Smith Jr. is going to be more capable of doing those things. So it's just a part of his game that he needs to continue to work on and show dedication to. Simple as that. It's not a knock on him, but it has to be something that he works on. Let's talk to Jonathan here for a second. This is a fun one. After James Harden not showing up for the media and will likely be gone soon via trade in Miami, failing to acquire both Damian Lillard and Andrew Holiday, does both teams seem destined for rebuilds? That's an interesting one. And frankly, Jonathan, I'm going to tease you here. Doug Norrie and I maybe we'll talk about it in an upcoming episode. I don't think that Miami's not in that mode. They're never really a rebuilding kind of team. I think that they're a tweaking. They've already shown the ability to go out and get guys to come to Miami. It is a destination place, so they can find ways to tweak things. Philadelphia, on the other hand, that's more interesting, right? They don't get Drew Holiday. Where is Joel Embiid in his opinion of the organization? They could be more in that vein of going in a rebuilding direction. And as we talked about on a previous episode, we certainly wouldn't hate if they go kind of start to tank, but stay just out of that top eight kind of range, because that's the pick that we have from them that's certainly protected. And that being the case, yeah, we got some other comments about Cam Thomas. Again, we're not here to knock Cam Thomas or his game. I think we're just here to say these are the takeaways from the media day and understanding there is still going to be a process here for the Brooklyn Nets when it comes to Cam Thomas. It looks like we're going to be talking about a team that starts veteran-based and allows that youth to have those opportunities to grow. And that's something we'll talk about on our upcoming episode next. What do we want to see in terms of balancing the now and the future and the hierarchy of that? Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Ben Simmons. Yeah, they play a lot. That's what it's about. But what about with Spencer Dinwiddie? What about with Dorian Finney-Smith? What about with Royce O'Neal? These are the other guys that we can talk takeaways from media day and then feather that in to what it's going to look like when they get out there on the court for Brooklyn. That being the case, my friends, I'm going to wrap it up. We got a little Monday Night Football action that I'm excited for with the New York Football Giants. Why I'm excited, who knows? They haven't proven that you should have any confidence in them, but that's the nature of wanting to cover these teams. Thank you again, guys. Really. Gerard, King, thanks for being here as well. Bruce, I see you up there as well. Really liking everything when it comes to you guys getting in here and being part of the conversation. Edmund Sumner, even an Edmund Sumner shout out as well. I recently, I'll just let you know, was hit up by Locked On Hornets and asked, what are we getting in this player? Listen, he's a contributor off the bench. We know that. There's a clear ceiling to his game, but he's a rocket, right, man? He's a shot out of a cannon player, downhill mentality. When I gave him my brief write-up on what they would be getting in Edmund Sumner, I also reflected back and said, nothing but love for Edmund Sumner, as we have for a lot of guys that aren't a part of the team anymore. But that's the nature of the beast. And sometimes guys come in that you think could carve out a role for themselves, and it just never materializes. And that's going to be the case, especially when you're going from a superstar driven era of your basketball organization into a new one, right? You're going to see a lot of these guys, Yuta Watanabe, right? They're just guys that we saw for but a moment, and now they'll go on to careers elsewhere. We'll be back again, obviously, as I said, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Appreciate everybody out there. You guys have been good. You've been great. You've been legends. We'll catch up with you next time, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.